Jacques Louis David experienced tumultuous times in his homeland of France, placing him at the heart of the French Revolution. His portrait of Marat have served as a profound source of inspiration for generations of artists. However, behind this portrait lies a mysterious and somber secret. Join me as we delve into Jacques Louis David's techniques employed in crafting his iconic portrait of Marat. Madame Tussaud was fetched by some men of arms who took her to the house of Marat, just after he had been killed by Charlotte Corday, for the purpose of taking a cast from his face. He was still warm in his bleeding body, and the cadaverous aspect of his almost diabolical features presented a picture repleted with horror, and Madame Tussaud performed her task under the influence of the most painful emotions. Welcome to another live presentation. In this video, we're going to be exploring David's painting techniques. I have put together some videos and images for you guys to take a look at. So let's just go ahead and take a look at some of these images and start going through some of this information. Why does David uses a live cast to make this painting? That's the live cast that Madame Tussaud takes of the body of a murdered Marat. Marat was murdered by Charlotte Corday. She was allied to an opposing party, and he was a journalist that was allied to the revolution. He was interested in radical ideas at the time. He's promoting the rights of the people, but they become radicals and they start sending people to their death. And he was a journalist that was interested in spreading his message through his newspaper. The newspaper's name was The Friend of the People. And Charlotte Corday sneaks into his home and stabs him to death. This kind of sets the stage for this amazing portrait painted by Jacques Louis David. Interesting fact that I came about when I was doing the research is that Madame Tussaud is forced to take a death mask or make a death mask of Marat. She was actually loyal to the monarchy, and she's forced to go in and perform this task for the National Convention against her will. These were her friends that she had to take casts of beheadings, people that were killed by the guillotine. She's forced to perform this task, and David uses this cast to aid in the creation of this amazing painting. Apparently, he uses this cast to make a life study or a cast study using light and shade, and from there, he'll execute a drawing. So this is the study that David makes of the death mask. And as you can see, he obviously is using his artistry to make a drawing that does not resemble a cast. He's putting probably a headband. He's painting the figure or the cast as if it was a live figure or a live model, in this case, a dead model. And he does a full charcoal study. I believe this is actually chalk and not charcoal. And he will use this drawing to aid in the creation of the painting. And as I explored all these facts about this painting, I was very impressed with how methodical David is in his creation of his paintings. I know that a lot of artists throughout the history of art have used live models and drawings, but he was tasked with a very important order, which was essentially to immortalize the martyrs of the revolution. And Jean-Paul Marat, in this case, was considered a martyr of the revolution by those that were allied to Robespierre and the Jacobins. This is an important fact, and he'll perform this task. This painting apparently took him all the way from July of 17, and I do have to pull up my facts here, from July of 1793 to October of 1793, so it was not a fast painting. He spent a few months working on it. It's very interesting to kind of analyze his process. Here you see an X-ray, and I'm going to be sharing with you guys the article that was published by Heritage Science, and it's titled Rethinking Jacques Louis David Marat Assassinate Through Material Evidence. And this is X-rays of the actual painting showing the underdrawing and essentially the process of how this painting was executed by David. As I explored some of these documents and I had to cross-reference a lot of this other information, I realized that, and I've shared this in the last live presentation from last week, the lead white ground David was using a lead white ground, pure lead white ground, although I wouldn't dare say all his paintings, but at least the ones that I have studied, there seems to be a pure lead white ground that is quite thick, perhaps 2 coats of lead white. It's not a thin coat of lead white, and it's because he wants that luminosity in a very smooth surface. And over this, he seems to have squared the drawing and draw freely with chalk or charcoal, and then reinforce the drawing with paint. So that's the material evidence that not only this article has provided, but also the Met. There's a great exhibition that the Met published years ago. It's the Jacques Louis David exhibition of his drawings, and I'm going to be referring to some of those in this live presentation. As I investigated a lot of these facts and the information available, here you could see the x-rays of the painting. There's a reflectogram and an x-ray. On the right-hand side, you have the x-ray, and on the other side, you have the reflectogram. And here you could clearly see a beautiful drawing, a drawing that has been developed. This is very different than you would see perhaps in a painting from Titian or Velázquez, where there's almost like a ghost, and you see that the painter was working directly with the brush and perhaps with a lot of pentimento. Here you see a very straightforward drawn image. And it's very, very important to mention this because you will see this reflected in a lot of his studies. He's an artist who's very thorough with his ideas. He's willing to do many studies and perfect those studies before he moves on to the actual process of painting. In the background, you see there the use of frotti, which is a kind of rubbing the paint, or the ébauche, which is a brownish undercolor that will go on top of the white ground, and that will kind of set an undertone for the top layers of color to go on top. And very interesting, you see the pattern. It's almost like pointillism, or these like dabs, spotted dabs in the background in particular. And you'll see that through the actual top layers. It's very important to analyze that, because that's just kind of giving you an under layer to kind of set the color on top. But we're going to get into that later on in another live presentation where I will study the actual painting technique. For today, I just want to focus on the drawing. So really interesting to see that the underdrawing or the drawn image has been reinforced. And for a lot of these painters from the 19th century, and painters from also the Renaissance and even the Baroque era, you see the same pattern, that the drawing is drawn in with, or brushed in with, essentially paint. Sometimes they use ink, and they essentially are reinforcing the drawing. And that's true of David as well, David's technique. Very beautiful composition and lay-in. You could see that there's not a lot of pentimento or corrections. So it's a pretty well preconceived idea of what he wanted to do. As you analyze a lot of these X-rays, you'll see that he's very objective in the way that he works with his paintings. And here I've taken examples that were also published in this article where they compare the pose, for example, in this beautiful painting to your left-hand side, which is Andromache Mourning Hector. There's a beautiful pose where you can see Hector lying on the bed, and he'll actually repeat that pose and take the idea for a second painting that's now missing, and it's a portrait of Le Pelletier, which was also one of the martyrs of the Revolution. I believe he paints this portrait first. It's now missing. After 1795, the portrait was returned to David, and David kept it all the way up to the end of his life, and then is purchased by the daughter of the subject. This is a drawing by one of his students, and it's Anatole de Vosges, and he actually executes or does a copy of the actual missing painting. So you see here how David is taking ideas, he's refining ideas and borrowing ideas from his own works, even the pose. So apparently this painting of Le Pelletier was a companion piece to the portrait of Marat, which was essentially a diptych. They were to be hung side by side, and David is tasked with immortalizing the martyrs of the revolution by the National Convention. This was a gamble that was not going to be, it's not going to pay off well for David, essentially, because Robespierre, they lose favor with the people and with other politicians, and they're essentially arrested. And David falls out of favor, and he essentially is imprisoned. You can see here the gridded drawing, and this is a reconstruction done by scientists where they are essentially using these grids to kind of figure out how the portraits would have been laid in and the similarities between this portrait. For a long time, I thought that David was transferring the drawing a lot like perhaps early Renaissance painters that were transferring a drawing, doing a cartoon, tracing the drawing, and transferring that cartoon to the canvas. But to my surprise, that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like David does these very thorough studies on paper, and then he will transfer them to the actual canvas through an actual grid that he sets up in the painting, in the early stages of the painting. This is a common practice by a lot of mural artists nowadays. A lot of artists use this important method and an important technique. I've used this technique myself to transfer compositions if I need to get the drawing or the composition correct. This is a good way to take the drawing, a very small drawing, and blow it up to a larger scale and not have to go through all the pentimento process. It's a nice process. It's very straightforward, and it seems like David and a lot of other neoclassical painters use this method. It's not new. It was used by a lot of Renaissance artists as well, and it actually allows for very free drawing. So it's you're drawing, you're gridding the canvas, but you're actually doing free drawing. You're drawing, freely within that grid, and it's actually a good method because you're not feeling like you're tracing. So it seems like David preferred this method. So from Friel Nemec, thank you for joining. It says here, some argue that David's compositions are too rigid or stiff. Any thoughts on that, please? Thank you. Well, it's open to interpretation. It's based on taste. If you're asking my taste, if you're asking, how I feel about David's compositions, I don't like all his work. I do like this painting in particular, The Death of Marat. I think it's a wonderful painting. It's a powerful painting because he's using religious iconography. I mean, it's almost like he's borrowing from Caravaggio. Some of his other works are very formal for me. I do like more of the Venetian paintings from the late 16th century, but that's just my taste. There's a lot of artists that do like Jacques Louis David and that find his compositions very harmonious and very balanced. So it's essentially up to you. I think he's an artist that cannot be discarded, though. He's an important figure in the history of art. And his technique is interesting. I mean, there's a lot of artists that were influenced by David. There's a lot of artists today that are working that use a lot of the neoclassical techniques to inform their work. So it's up to you. I present these live presentations because it's so interesting to take a look at the whole gamma of techniques that a lot of artists use. So I have a question here from Jeff. Jeff Vasquez, thank you for joining. What kind of things that he used in his work you find useful for more Venetian style work? I don't know if the underdrawing already said was the main reason why his painting looked kind of stiff. Well, yeah, those are very important analysis, and there is an argument. I mean, when I was in school, a lot of the teachers at my school would not like neoclassical painting, and it's understandably so. I mean, we're used to abstract painting and these very loose, expressive paintings in modernism, and his paintings do seem very kind of stiff and controlled at times. Not all. I mean, I think this painting is quite expressive, in the composition. It's very, very symmetrical, and that symmetry has an iconography. I mean, it was by design. So I think by analyzing that and just learning from that, I think we could be informed by that as well. I will be honest. I mean, I go to the museums, and if I'm at Del Prado, I will not go into the or if I go to the Louvre, I will not go to look at the neoclassical painters first. I will go see Da Vinci and Titian, and all the Venetians, because obviously that's something that calls to me. These are painters that I love. But I don't discard David or neoclassical painters. I think there's always something to be learned from these masters. The process of gridding out, the process in which they distill the image through drawings. And for students that are wanting to understand the process, that's very telling. So I'm going to go ahead and end this live presentation here. Thank you for joining.